Okay, so we're ready to lay out for our mortise now. And if we go back to our SketchUp plan, we know that our leg is 4 inches in from the edge. Now, also remember to add the 3/16 shoulder that we have here, and that'll give us 4 3/16, and that's where our mortise is actually going to start. So I've got both the start and the end laid out, as well as the total length of it. And what I did was I went ahead and drew a center line here. And what I'm going to do to make it a little bit easier is basically take it over to the drill press and drill this out with a 5/8 bit. I want to make a smaller hole than what I'm actually going to need, and then I'll use the router to come back and ultimately clean it up. And the reason I want to do that is because the bit that I'm using actually is not really meant to plunge. Let me show you another piece of wood here, and I'll demonstrate what I'm talking about. Okay, so here's the router bit that we're going to use. Now, what's important to look at is the cutting edge on the bottom. There's 2 cutting wings, however, they don't extend to the middle. So with them stopping short like this, what you have is essentially an area that's not going to get cut. It's basically just going to bottom out. And what that looks like is this right here. So we can see where the wings were cutting, however the center portion where the wings don't come together to the center is left untouched. So again, there's no way that this can actually plunge any deeper than this cut right here without it starting to burn. You can actually see it started right there. So that's why we're going to take it over to the drill press, remove most of the material, and it's also going to save a little bit of wear and tear on the bit as well as the router motor. Okay, so I did all that I can do on the drill press. Mine being a benchtop model, it just doesn't have the capacity to go the entire length, even flipping it end for end. So the center I'm just going to have to do with a hand drill, which is no big deal. I won't be able to clean up in between the holes like I did here, but the router can certainly take care of that. Now, another thing I want to point out is the depth that I went to. Remember, we were shooting for an inch and a 32nd, and right now I am at just under 7/8 of an inch. And that's due to the fact, of course, that a Forstner bit has a point on the end of it, which sticks out further. So without taking any chances of it actually plunging through, if I had went to the depth that the flat part of the Forstner bit would have created, the tip is going to get very close to the edge, so I didn't want to take any chances. Again, the router bit can certainly take care of that much. Even if I have to make a couple of very small depth cuts at the very end, we have a little bit of room to play with before those wing tips bottom out. So I'm going to set up a straight edge here, and then we're going to take the router and run it across. Alright, so we have our mortises done, and we're now ready to fit the two together. At this stage, we have to modify one or the other. We can either round over the corners of our tenon or square up the shoulders in our mortise. in my opinion, neither method would be wrong. You're not going to take away or add strength by doing either one. All your strength is coming from the tenon itself. These corners really aren't gonna add any more strength or take it away if you clip the corners. As long as you have a good snug fit on the tenon itself, it's going to be plenty strong enough. So basically, do whatever method is easier and works best for you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to square up my corners here. And what I like about this is with our shoulder here, you're never going to see this anyway. And so it's a good time to practice your chiseling skills, to practice doing these shear cuts straight down, squaring up mortises, and just again get the feel for the chisel. We are later on going to do a through mortise here in our leg for the stretcher, so it's a good opportunity to go ahead and get a little bit of practice in making these nice square crisp corners, because even though these aren't going to be seen later on down the road with our stretcher, it is going to be seen. So let's go ahead, take a little time, and get this right. Okay, so I'm going to explain the method that I'm going to do here. First step is get a good sharp chisel. Now, my chisels are kind of old. They've been around for a while, kind of rusted as you can see, but the edges are truly a mirrored image. This has just been sharpened, just been honed, and it's something that I just can't stress enough is honing. It was something that I always felt was overkill until I tried it, and now I'm just a huge believer in it. So take a little time, do a little reading, watch some videos, and make a little honing setup. It really does make an incredible amount of difference. So with that being said, what we're going to do is go across the grain first, which is going to be in this direction, and I'm just going to get right on the line and basically just press down, wiggling it just a little bit. All you want to do is score that line. Once you go across the grain, you're now going to go with the grain, and again, right on the line, wiggle it down just like that. All we're wanting to do is essentially score that. Now, I'm going to come in, and it's probably going to be a little hard for you guys to see, but I just want to come in, remove a little bit of wood, working down to that score line. Okay, once that score line is established and your shoulder is there, you can now come in and go a little bit deeper. Repeat the process one more time. Okay. Now that we have a good starting point, you can kind of come in and you can add a little bit of pressure. You can use the hammer, drive it down in there. You don't want to make the whole cut, of course, at once, but you can drive it down a good 1/8 of an inch, 3/16, and again, go across the grain first, then go with the grain. Then you're going to come back in, pare that little piece out, and just keep working your way down. At the end, we'll do some shear cuts to really get it nice and straight. Okay, so you can really see it starting to take shape now. The legs are fitting nicely. You can kind of get an idea of the scale. The top right now still looks a little bit big, but again, we're going to add some nice gentle curves to it, and that's really going to visually thin it out for us. But I'm very pleased with the grain of this ambrosia maple. Spectacular stuff. One of the things that I kind of went around with in designing this piece was doing a through tenon on this and then wedging the top. It's a very strong joint and it's a very beautiful joint. But after debating for quite a while on it, I decided that the grain that you've seen from the ambrosia, all the markings, would look better than seeing the joinery itself. So I went ahead and I stuck with that, and I'm glad I did. Now, speaking of through tenons, we're ready to go ahead and cut our stretcher. And on that, we are going to do through tenons down here on the legs. So I've got a piece of stock left over from cutting the slab. We're going to head over to the table saw and start milling it up right now. So with the piece laid on its side and checking the legs for square, which they are, the good thing about this joint is it pretty much has to be square. What I've done is I got my stretcher here that has now been milled nice and square, and it's to the final thickness, which is 1 inch by 1.5. So I'm just going to go ahead and slide it all the way up to the top here, just eyeballing it on center. That's not important just yet. And the first thing I want to do is go ahead and mark me a little triangle here. That way, as we're test fitting the through mortises, we don't get it flipped up, around and get it crossed up, and we have it back in the same orientation every time. So with that being done, what I want to do is simply take my pencil, come underneath here, and mark this intersection. Okay. With that being done, we can go ahead and start laying out our mortises, and this here will represent our shoulder cuts all the way around it. Now, laying these out using the combination square, it's a good idea to go back up and just double check yourself and make sure that your legs are square. If your combination square and your line lines up nice and parallel, well, you got a good straight cut. So what I want to do here is get it right on that line. I'm going to take a razor knife and just score that grain. That's going to prevent some tear out later on. So I'm just going to rotate it all the way around, transfer the lines, do it on both sides. Then we'll head back over to the table saw and start forming these tenons. Now, if you remember the first time, we used the dado blade to cut the tenons on our leg stock, and that's perfectly acceptable. On the stretcher, though, I'm going to use basically just my individual single blade, and I just want to do that to show you guys another alternative technique for cutting them on the table saw if you don't have a dado blade. Also, when I scored these lines, you may be wondering why I didn't score them on the legs. Well, that's actually because I'm going to chamfer all these edges anyway, so it's really not going to matter. Scoring lines will take care of this this fraying here of the grain, and ultimately I am going to chamfer these edges anyway, but again, it's just showing you a separate technique for doing it. So I've got my sled set up, and I've got a stop block here, just a simple piece of wood clamped down, and what I did was put a little screw here on the end of it, and this is just kind of a little micro adjustment gauge that I'm going to use. I want to really sneak up on this line. This score line here is much thinner than a pencil line. So I want to start definitely away from it and just basically back out the screw, leaving the stop block clamped in place, and sneak up to this line until I get right on it and have nice clean cuts. We're going to score it all the way around 1/4 inch deep, and then we'll switch to a separate homemade jig to actually clean up the shoulders here. But ultimately what we're hoping to get here is a 3/4 by 1/2 inch tenon. So you can see that by scoring those lines, we have nice clean cuts. There's no tearing of the grain, no fraying of the grain. And again, it doesn't matter in this instance because everything's going to get chamfered anyway, but take the opportunity like now when it doesn't matter to get the skills and the practice in to do it right for next time. You don't want to wait until you're doing that particular project that calls for a nice clean cut like this and then try and get it right. Go ahead and get the practice in now when it doesn't matter, and it'll pay off on down the road. So let me change the setup here on the table saw, and we'll come back and we'll make our shoulder cuts.